Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we're doing a rigorous evidence-first review of exactly how GhostMesh behaves when workers just disappear, and your execution infrastructure fundamentally fails. We spend so much time in systems engineering obsessing over how things run, but the true test of any architecture is what it does when the floor literally falls out from under it. In this explainer, we're going to break down the exact mechanics of recovery, durable receipts, and genuine self-healing.
Right off the bat, we need to completely reject the industry's simplistic definition of resilience. Resilience is not about 100% uninterrupted, flawless uptime. Honestly, that's a myth. In the GhostMesh architecture, resilience means that when a failure inevitably happens, it is observable, it's strictly bounded, it's fully recoverable, and above all else, it doesn't erase the truth about what just happened. So we have to ask a very practical, real-world question. What actually happens to the work in progress, the authority to execute that work, and the system state when the underlying execution provider simply vanishes? We're going to answer this by treating the rest of this explainer as a calm, technical incident review of a real infrastructure outage, relying strictly on the explicit evidence captured in the logs. Let's start with Section 1, when the execution provider fails, looking specifically at the August 6, 2026 outage. This wasn't some theoretical whiteboard exercise. We're looking at live, empirical evidence from the August 6th GitHub Actions and Pages failure. This was a major external provider outage that fundamentally interrupted active, governed liens inside GhostMesh. It's like watching dominoes fall, right? First, webhook triggers get throttled. Then, push and pull request events stop reliably starting workflows. Next thing you know, runner capacity is deeply constrained, leaving active workflows completely skipped, and jobs stranded or stalled without runners. It was a complete cascade failure of the execution plane. Moving to Section 2, the mechanics of continuity and how we actually survive this kind of interruption. So how do you survive that level of chaos? When a runner is unavailable or a deployment suddenly goes stale, the system can't just panic. The answer here lies in durable receipts. Listen, a simple command to a model or elapsed time on a clock, that is absolutely not proof of execution. GhostMesh demands durable receipts to prove exactly what was authorized, the exact tested commit, the mutations, and the terminal state that was left behind. It takes invisible activity and converts it into verifiable evidence that lives outside of the temporary worker. I love how this illustrates state categorization. Instead of just showing you a spinning UI wheel and pretending progress exists when it clearly doesn't, GhostMesh explicitly types the failure. Sure, we have standard states like queued, claimed, and running, but crucially, we also have states like blocked_provider and abandoned lease expired. We know exactly if a job is actively reasoning or if it's just sitting there, stuck downstream. The failure is fully 100% visible. And by persisting these claims, leases, and exact head bases, GhostMesh bounds the failure. It preserves the exact work identity. It distinguishes a genuinely active job from a stale one. And this is critical. It prevents silent authority escalation or those massive uncontrolled retry storms. When it detects a failure, it doesn't just blindly fire off 100 speculative retries. It preserves the obligation to retry only when capacity actually returns, maintaining strict single-rider control. During this outage, we hit a pretty painful truth. Mechanically, green validation just isn't enough. I mean, a CI pipeline saying success is completely meaningless if you get paged at 2 a.m. because the page won't actually load for the user. GhostMesh redefines this as owner-ready. True continuity means verifying the actual handoff. The exact expected content has to exist at the exact clickable route for the exact tested head. If it falls back to an old page or just loads indefinitely, it is not owner-ready, no matter what the deployment badge says. Okay, let's jump into Section 3, surviving the August outage, specifically focusing on recovery and replay. How do we actually pick up the pieces when execution capacity finally comes back online? Well, recovery has to be deterministic. The system freezes the current main state so we aren't chasing a moving target. It verifies the exact head artifact. It deploys an exact protected development candidate. And only then does it run hosted browser and API checks. This means an authorized worker can continue from a perfectly persisted state. Zero duplicated mutations, zero corrupted provenance. To put that into perspective, across 3,669 workflow runs during this specific case study, the architecture proved it could safely queue work. It successfully prevented unauthorized retries during the outage, it managed overlapping lanes beautifully, and it seamlessly handled an exact rollback. There's a quote from the incident review that I think hits the nail on the head. The mesh prevented silent corruption more reliably than it prevented wasted motion, confusion, or owner overload. It's a very rigorous, technically calm admission. The safety plane basically matured faster than the operability plane. It was exceptionally good at containing the damage, even if there was still some friction for the human operator who had to wait around for the system to recover. Let's pivot to Section 4, the sovereign local execution turn, and look at how we mitigate provider concentration. That August 6th outage didn't just test the system. It really accelerated a critical new direction. It proved that relying entirely on a single cloud provider for execution is a massive concentration risk. True resilience demands provider-neutral execution semantics. GhostMesh separates the source forge from the execution dispatcher. This lets us use owner-controlled sovereign compute where the exact same operation, the exact same commit SHA, runs equivalently on local hardware as it does on hosted cloud compute, all while completely preserving the control model and authority. This brings us to a locked architectural doctrine for GhostMesh. No execution provider may be the canonical representation of an executable GhostMesh operation. So providers like GitHub, Cloudflare, or local machines, they are replaceable implementations. They are not constitutional dependencies. The contract always outlives the vendor. Finally, Section 5, the architectural lesson. Moving from ghosts to governed continuity. So, stepping back, what's the big takeaway here for how we build systems? We have to fundamentally invert the problem. The old assumption in AI development was that we had to preserve the context window, right? We had to make the temporary intelligence immortal just to maintain continuity. The GhostMesh reality is the exact opposite. We externalize the state, the authority, the policy, and the evidence. We don't need immortal workers. We need an architecture that preserves the truth when those workers inevitably die. The defining property here isn't that every worker survives. It's that the work, the authority, and the evidence can survive the worker. The mesh becomes trustworthy not because components miraculously stop failing, but because failure stops destroying your continuity. It truly is a persistent system built from temporary intelligence. I'll leave you with this final thought to consider about your own architecture. If your primary execution provider just vanished right now, would your system's authority, evidence, and continuity actually survive the worker? Or would you be left scrambling, trying to reconstruct reality from chat logs and scattered CI badges? True resiliency means the capability must always outlive the ghost. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.